Hello and welcome to this public lecture series on Pathways and Paradigms for India's G20 presidency. Today we talk about Inner Asia, especially Mongolia. Mongolia is neither a member of G20 nor a guest invitee to the summit in New Delhi this year. So what can India's presidency of G20, which is premised on the theme Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, meaning one earth, one family, one future, possibly bring for Mongolia, with which it has a very strong cultural connect? Mongolia is heavily dependent on imports from China and Chinese ports and roads logistics to access the world market. Sandwiched between Russia and China, it espouses multilateral diplomacy and cautiously treads a tightrope on the war in Ukraine. To talk to us on all of this, I'm joined by Professor Sharad Kumar Soni, an eminent expert on Inner Asia. Professor Sharad K. Soni is the chairperson at the Center for Inner Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. Formerly, he headed several other departments in JNU as Director International Collaboration, Director UGC Area Studies Program, Deputy Director UGC Human Resource Development Center. He has published over 6 books, 3 monographs, and more than 100 research articles, papers, chapters in scholarly journals and edited books on geopolitics, foreign and security policy, as well as history and culture of Inner Asian and Eurasian studies. He was also the academic coordinator of a delegation to Mongolia led by ICCR, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. For his distinguished achievements in Mongolian studies and advancing India's relations with Mongolia, Professor Soni was also conferred with Order of Nirandal, one of the highest civilian awards of Mongolia, and honored medal by the decree of the President of Mongolia in 2015 and 2006. Professor Soni has an international academic profile and has been a visiting scholar at Cambridge University, visiting professor at the University of Shandong University, Sichuan University, Eurasian National University, Mongolian Academy of Sciences, among several others. He is also the book review editor South Asia for Asian Ethnicity Journal published by Routledge and a member of the editorial board for European Scientific Journal, Mongolian Journal of International Affairs, and International Studies published by SAGE. Please join me in welcoming Professor Sharad Soni. Professor Soni, your lecture is titled Reimagining Inner Asia under India's G20 presidency. Please tell us what the canvas of Inner Asia could possibly look like under India's G20 presidency. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Samina. Dear students, researchers, scholars, friends and colleagues. We have been studying a lot about America, Europe, Russia, China, when we talk about regions, South Asia, West Asia, Africa and all. But today I am taking to a new region, which not many of you might be knowing. And this region is known as Inner Asia. This region has its own historical importance, as this is the region which witnessed the founding of the first nomadic empire in the world by Hunas. Hunnus we call in Mongolian, in the 3rd century BC. And during their regime, in the 1st century AD, we have witnessed the first Buddhist contact between India and Mongolia. This is the region which witnessed the founding of the first ever contiguous land empire, that is the largest contiguous land empire in the world by the Mongols, led by Genghis Khan in 13th century. This is the region where several polities, dispersed to form their own principalities in adjoining region. I would also say this is the region which witnessed the first ever signing of the agreement between any European and any Asian power, that is Tsarist Russian Empire and the Manchu Chinese Empire, and that treaty was Treaty of Nachin, signed between the two powers in 1689. And the importance of this treaty was that it paved the way for annexation of several areas of Greater Mongolia or in the Inner Asian region, either into Russia or into China. For example, Buryat Mongolia region and Tuva region, which are Mongol ethnicity, and which are in Asiatic Russia, that was incorporated by Russia. And these two regions are now, part of Russian Federation nowadays. And similarly, China, they annexed Xinjiang, which was ruled by Mongol Empire, and that time the Mongol Empire was in 17th century, I'm talking about 17th, 18th century, Jungarian state, So Xinjiang that time was different, very different. It was a Mongol area. And then Inner Mongolia, that was also incorporated into China, long back in 17th century again. This is the reason which also witnessed, Cold War in Asia between Russia and China, Soviet Union for that matter, I would say, until Gorbachev took over power, and in 1986 he announced his Vladivostok initiative. The exact date is 26 July 1986. In Vladivostok he announced basically to normalize relations with China. And this initiative included a lot of things, like a few things I could share with you. The first one, immediate withdrawal of Soviet troops from Afghanistan. And second, the resolution of Cambodian crisis, the Cambodian crisis. And the third one was withdrawal of Soviet troops stations in Mongolian territory bordering China. So all three were accepted by Gorbachev. And then since then, normalization of relations between Soviet Union and, for that matter, Russia and China started. This is the reason I would also say, which is not just an hinterland to Russia and China, but itself constitutes a sphere or center which has its particular historical dynamics in terms of geocultural setting, like nomadism, Buddhism, and pastoral economy, which are still identity of their people, but with modern outlook in this globalized world, I would say. Lastly, this is the region which in geographical parlance composed of western frontier regions of China, that also includes Central Asia, Mongolia and Asiatic Russia, or the Russian Siberian region going up to the Far East. So this is the uniqueness of this Inner Asian region. In the post-Cold War period, or more precisely in the 21st century, the whole Inner Asian region has been witnessing enormous change, as the socialism of the mid-19th century, or mid-20th century rather, I would say, has been replaced by new economic and political processes. As such, a large part of Inner Asia is now no longer peripheral, but intermediate between centers of gravity either in Russia or in China. A case in point here is Mongolia, which is situated at the heart of Inner Asia. And it has for quite some times now, occupied a significant place in India's foreign policy, both in terms of geopolitics as well as culture based on Buddhism. I would restrict myself to Mongolia here so far as India's outreach to Inner Asia is concerned, especially under India's G20 presidency. Both historically as well as in contemporary times, Mongolia is seen through the prism of great power interest. And in such interest, where does India basically stand? That is what I would like to emphasize on. In fact, Inner Asia suddenly came into light in 2015 when Prime Minister Modi undertook a visit after his first term in office. He came into power in 2014. And, with him in power, India's foreign policy saw a revamp. Smaller countries in Asia too became prominent at that point of time in India's foreign policy. And that was the reason Prime Minister Modi also made a plan to visit Mongolia. This visit was, of great significance of reinvigoration of the efforts made by New Delhi towards comprehensive engagement in its extended neighborhood. I would explain it later on. Modi became first ever Prime Minister to have visited Mongolia. And Modi's visit to Mongolia became all the more important given that the importance of Mongolia to India today not just remains a civilizational, but a geostrategic and geoeconomic as well. One would come across the fact that due to the landlocked geographical situation or location between Russia and China, Mongolia has always been influenced by actions and reactions of these two neighboring powers, great neighboring powers, I would say, whose great came precisely in Inner Asia, covering most of the Eurasian landmass. Inner Asia is also known as Central Eurasia. It is located in Central Eurasia. Most of the students of Russian and Central Asian studies, they might be knowing. So they put a stumbling block to the growth of meaningful bilateral relations with the outside world, Mongolia's outside world. But the post-Soviet period, or for that matter, post-Cold War period, has been witnessing a new Mongolia, which has its own foreign policy that stresses on maintaining equidistance with China and Russia. The two neighbors. India too has become, an important country in Mongolia's foreign policy, or I would say in Mongolia's words, to maintain a balance of influence there. So balance of power, balance of influence, these kinds of words are being used by Mongolian scholars there. At this point, I would like to highlight 4 key factors that can be identified for India-Mongolia bonhomie. The first is India's extended neighborhood, or for that matter, India's Act East policy. While the regions in South Asia, the Indian subcontinent, the members of SAARC countries, they represent India's immediate neighborhood. The regions beyond South Asia represent India's extended neighborhood. And the term extended neighborhood made its entry into, Indian foreign policy making in the 1990s, following concerns of Indian analysts that India should break out of its claustrophic, confines of South Asia. And there has been no looking back since then. And ultimately, trade, transport, and connectivity, have become the thrilling words in India's extended neighborhood policy, or what we can call its or India's strategic frontiers. As regards in East Asia, since 1991, India's look east policy was working well. There was no issue at all. Everything was going in favor of India, until Modi government failed to make it more action-oriented like policy. And hence the name was changed, Act East policy, And at that point of time, if you might remember, there was a visit of Hillary Clinton. And she was the one who gave this name, Act East policy. She said during one of the speeches that India should now act in East Asia. And from there, I think the word must have been picked up. So the policy became Act East policy. So it was in November 2014. And that is to say, India's look east policy for over 2 decades has worked in the right direction, though the focus has been confined mainly to Southeast Asia. Northeast Asia has remained untouched, particularly in terms of regional cooperation. So I would say East Asia composed of 2 sub-regions. One is Southeast Asia, another is Northeast Asia. Most of us, we generally focus on Southeast Asia. Northeast Asia, we don't say. We just say Japan, China, and Korea, they are in East Asia. That's all. No, they belong to Northeast Asia. I'll come into later on. चलो मैं बता ही देता हूँ. Northeast Asia is a sub-region, of East Asia and has an enormous geostrategic concerns, significance, I would say, as it is positioned at a crucial juncture of energy supply chain. And hence, it figures prominently in terms of energy cooperation initiatives. Both the energy consuming countries, that is China, the 2 Koreas and Japan, and the energy supplying countries, Russia and Mongolia, they belong to Northeast Asia region. So Mongolia also identifies itself as a Northeast Asian region due to geographical contiguity. And all this make this region an important entity connecting a networking of growing, supplies and markets for energy. Since Northeast Asia is becoming a major factor in India's strategic vision, in the East Asian region, Mongolia too has figured prominently in India's foreign policy, as it is closer to Northeast Asia, as I already said. The visit of Prime Minister Modi to Mongolia has changed the spectrum of bilateral relations, entire bilateral relations, I say, so much so that Mongolia now desires to be part of India's new Asian outreach, both diplomatically as well as culturally. Indian policymakers recognize that today Mongolia is an important part of India's Act East policy. And, they both are closely linked to, with the future of Asia Pacific, and, or for that matter, of late, we are calling it Indo-Pacific, So, another factor, I would say, the China factor. China factor is very important so far as India-Mongolia relations is concerned. In recent years, what we witnessed, that China has been spending much political energy in cultivating India's, neighbors in the subcontinent and the Indian Ocean. In fact, in 1990s, China launched its policy towards its neighbors, and that policy was known as China's peripheral policy or good neighborliness policy. So these are the two policy. In Chinese, I cannot pronounce rightly, so I'm not saying in Chinese, in English. However, by pursuing its, periphery policy or good neighborly policy, China tried to make its presence felt in its neighborhood in order to expand its power muscle there, be it South Asia or East Asia as a whole. Since India too needed to cultivate, good relations in China's backyard, Mongolia has been a good option for India to do so. And even Modi's visit to Mongolia seems to have been aimed in this direction as well, as several analysts have pointed it out. Yet we should also keep in mind that Mongolia's trade with China represents more than half of its total external trade. In particular, China receives more than 90% of Mongolia's exports. And, it is the largest trading partner of Mongolia since 2000 and is the largest investor in Mongolia since 1999. And the trade figure as of now has reached more than 10 billion US dollars. So in comparison to China, despite signing a number of bilateral agreements, India's trade and economic ties with Mongolia have not been impressive in any way. It is just, a little more than, 30 million US dollar. So the reason is this unimpressive trade figure. The reason for that is basically distance. You have to do trade with Mongolia only through two routes, either through Russia or through China. Russia is, just forget about Russia because it's very far. Through China, it's near, but the custom duties at the border points is so heavy that it's not viable, and that's the reason why India-Mongolia economic or trade relations are not going. So the only option India has to do infrastructure development in Mongolia. That way India can develop its economic relations there. I'll come later on. Now the third neighbor policy factor. About this factor, I would say India has occupied an important place. Third neighbor policy is basically Mongolia's foreign, it's a part of Mongolia's foreign policy. So India has occupied an important place in Mongolia's foreign policy, and for that matter, a third neighbor policy since 2011. And when Mongolia revised its foreign policy, the foreign policy originally was adopted in 1994 when Mongolia embarked on the democratic path. First of all, it started with making of its constitution, which it adopted in 1992, and 1994 foreign policy and security policy. And then it was revised in 2011. Why was the need to revise? Because in 1999 China became largest investor, and in 2000 China became the largest trading partner of Mongolia. And this was one of the reasons that Mongolia felt that China is economically dominating Mongolia. And historically, China threat perception has always worked in Mongolia's mind. So this was this threat perception worked also, and they started doing in terms of revising its foreign policy. And so emerged the third neighbor policy out of that. And for the first time, India figured prominently in Mongolia's third neighbor policy, which is driven by, I would say, Mongolia geopolitical, geoeconomic, and geostrategic concerns, which have made this less populated country with only little more than 3 million population, but in terms of geography, the land is as big as India. So you can imagine, so vast land, but only 3 million population. So they have, a lot of opportunities also because they have barren land. I'll come about this later on. But this gave Mongolia opportunity to make friendship with countries other than Russia and China, both within and outside. It came into being as a policy of balancing Mongolia's two geographic neighbors, China and Russia, by developing bilateral and multilateral cooperations with developed democracies in the areas of politics, economy, culture, and human security also, I would say. This policy, however, is derived from both the close historical cultural ties as well as friendliness, with other countries which are often based on shared values, common interest, or even, simply societal sympathy. In case of Japan, Mongolia is very clear that it's identified third neighbors, particularly the USA, Germany, Japan, India, South Korea, Germany, Australia, and even Turkey. In addition to Canada and Australia, also I would say, are geographically distant and hence do not, present the same risks that its geographic neighbors China and Russia do in terms of dominance. So this was also one of the reasons why Mongolia adopted its third neighbor policy. Ever since India's elevation to Mongolia's third neighbor was declared, the two sides began to work, towards giving a new impetus to their bilateral relationship. What is new today in India's position in Mongolia's diplomacy of external relations? I would say it is being perceived as its third neighbor. I mean, India is being perceived as Mongolia's third neighbor in both regional and international context, particularly in the context of India's role in promoting a multipolar security structure in Asia. This is in sharp contrast to the ordinary viewpoint that India-Mongolia relations are based only on, age-old cultural linkages. So you see, age-old culture linkages based on Buddhist traditions, I would add here. Yet there are also limits to Indian presence in Mongolia, with just two neighbors, with whom Mongolia has had difficult relations in the past. Mongolia has no interest in provoking either Russia or China by undertaking activities which would be hostile to them. Like all small states with large neighbors, Mongolia wants a measure of a strategic autonomy from them. And that's what Mongolia is aiming there. And whatever it is doing for its foreign policy is all concentrated in this just two words, strategic autonomy. As a third neighbor, India wants to, support Mongolia in whatever it can. One significant example is India's support of extending $1.236 billion line of credit to Mongolia for infrastructure development. And this was announced when Prime Minister Modi visited Mongolia. He announced $1 billion of an line of credit for an infrastructure development, but later on the money was increased to 236 million more, and so the total figure came to 1.236 billion US dollars, and this was invested in constructing first ever oil refinery in Mongolia, which is being built with the support of India. Engineers India Limited is constructing that there, and this is going to start production by 2025, when India-Mongolia relations are going to complete 75 years of diplomatic relations, I would say. This oil refinery, when it is completed or start production or refining, it will help Mongolia to cut some of its dependence on Russia, because Russian fuel, rather, I would say, as the plant has an annual capacity of refining, 1.5 million metric tons of Mongolia's crude oil. Mongolia has crude oil, but there was no refinery, so it had to import from Russia, and more than 90%, energy supplies. I mean, in terms of fuel, diesel, petrol, everything is fulfilled by Russia only. And with this, oil refinery, when it start production, almost 70% of domestic consumption will be fulfilled in Mongolia. So that's the major development what India has been doing there. Presently, reliance on essential energy and fuel supplies from Russia, as I said, is more than 90%, and which makes Mongolia vulnerable, to supply shocks and price rises also. Sometimes Russia suddenly increase the price and Mongolia has no option but to pay, especially as Russia has been known to turn off supply taps time and again. So that's the habit of Russia in doing this. Mongolia's own oil refinery will drastically reduce such vulnerability in future as it can be hoped. Recently, the two sides for the first time, two sides, I mean India and Mongolia, they have for the first time explored the possibility of cooperating in areas of space research as well as renewable energy. Solar energy is one of them, and that is in abundance in Mongolia, I would say, and cooperation is solicited, especially as India has emerged as the leader by way of the International Solar Alliance, and our very own ambitious alternate and energy, renewable energy projects. So these are going to help Mongolia a lot. Now I'll come to another factor, that is culture. And culture in terms of Buddhist factor, rather I would say, in India's policy towards Mongolia. India became well known in Mongolia, or for that matter, Mongolian steppe of Inner Asia, due to the spread of Buddhism, even before the appearance of the Mongols as a unified force in the steppe of Inner Asia. In the pre-Mongol period, as I said earlier, Buddhism that reached Mongolia through Central Asia, from its original home in India, played a major role in making the ancient nomadic tribes familiar with the Indian culture. So there is civilizational link, we might call it. Later, such linkages between the two sides, became intense and inseparable, so much so that they are today known as spiritual neighbors. So you can read many places, it's written in a spiritual neighbor. Mongolia so many times called India, India is our spiritual neighbor. So irrespective of its political status in different span of time, Mongolia's Buddhist identity has been the most obvious phenomena in the history of Indo-Mongolian spiritual intercourse. Two succinct regions can be identified as to why India and Mongolia are known as spiritual neighbors. So first and foremost, I would say India is the birthplace of Buddha, and that provides enough reason for the Buddhist Mongolia to be known as spiritual neighbors. Why I call Buddhist Mongolia? Because more than 70% of populations are Buddhist in Mongolia. So it is Buddhist Mongolia basically. Secondly, India is adored in Mongolia not only as a land of Buddha or land of Dharma, but also a country to which the Mongolian people attribute all that have, been considered the highest attainments of wisdom and learning. The Mongolian translation of two great Indo-Buddhist collections, that is known as Kanjur, which is in 108 volumes, and the Tanjur, which are in 226 volumes, are the evidence of this spiritual intercourse between the two countries. And thirdly, Mongolian language has traditionally been enriched by a vast terminology and rich phraseology borrowed from Sanskrit. So that is also one of the phenomena which makes the two countries spiritual neighbors. I would give you example. This is evident from the Mongolian script, which is called Swayambo. It is not the new script. The script has died out. It is known as Soyombo. So Swayambo. And also in English it is called quadratic, but because its shape was quadratic, it was invented by Uno-Udur Janabazar, who belonged to the royal family, and he was the first, Jepsun Damba Khutak of Mongolia, that is equivalent to Dalai Lama in Tibetan Buddhism. So, he invented this in 18th century, in the beginning of 18th century, this, and Swayambhu is of Sanskrit origin, that has been originated from Swayambhu. Swayambhu. Swayam means self, Bhu means being. So, self being means freedom. So, although this script has died, its first letter, to which Swayambho the name has been given, is still visible in the Mongolian national flag, which is the symbol of freedom and sovereignty for Mongolia. So this is also one of the reasons why India and Mongolia are known as spiritual neighbors. Now, while Mongolia was embarking on a democratic transition after a peaceful revolution of 1989-90, a major development took place to strengthen not only Mongolia-India diplomatic relations, but also their Buddhist linkages. And this time, even before the breakup of the Soviet Union, even before the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1990, Venerable Kushok Bakula, who hailed from Ladakh, he was posted in Mongolia as Indian diplomat, and he was Buddhist monk basically. And he worked a lot for the revival of Buddhism in Mongolia, which suffered during the Cold War period due to the Soviet Union's domination. So the Buddhist population went down, but revival of Buddhism, a major contribution has been made by Kushok Bakula, diplomat, or Venerable Kushok Bakula. He was monk, diplomat. He is also I don't remember exactly. He was known as Baksha. Baksha means monk diplomat or diplomat monk, something like that. So he is credited with constructing a number of monasteries in Mongolia. He provided ordering to many Mongolian citizens there. He made the efforts to allow women in a monastery who were not allowed earlier. So that was the efforts made by Kushok Bakula in Mongolia, and such evidences of Mongolia and India spiritual linkages, I would say, make it crucial for the two countries to cooperate each other in wide-ranging areas of mutual concerns. Today, Buddhism as a cultural diplomacy or as a soft power tool is playing a critical role in foreign policy in so many countries, and I would say India and Mongolia are not exception in using it. To a great extent today, Buddhism, remains at the key at the very forefront of, India's new Asian, or for that matter, inner Asian outreach, both culturally as well as diplomatically. So these were some important factors which I highlighted that brought India and Mongolia close in the contemporary period. Now, talking about the importance of Mongolia's strategic partnership with its third neighbors, there is one important factor also I would like to highlight. In the global scenario, making a strategic partnership is very important, for a smaller countries like Mongolia, especially in terms of great power interest in this part of the world. You see, Mongolia's entry into a strategic partnership with three third neighbor countries, US, Japan, and India, can be well described as a significant step, given that Mongolia needs a balance of power strategy, as I mentioned earlier, and also for preventive diplomacy to avoid being victimized by its powerful neighbors. And as of now, Mongolia has signed its strategic partnership with 6 countries, beginning from Russia, in 2006, Japan in 2010, in 2010, China in 2014, with India in 2015, and with US, which is latest edition, in 2019. In this scenario, Mongolia's third neighbor policy appears to be becoming truly effective despite growing Chinese and Russian presence, especially in the economic trade fields. A strategic partnership with China and Russia is indeed a balancing act on the part of Mongolia, which gives a guarantee that neither Moscow nor Beijing could dominate Mongolia outrightly. So that's the idea of signing the strategic partnership with these two neighbors. However, strategic partnership agreements with the US, Mongolia, and India have altogether different connotations from those signed with China and Russia. Japan is credited with being the first third neighbor of Mongolia to have signed a strategic partnership, as I said, in 2010. Although Japan has been a poster child for Mongolia's third neighbor policy. Until 2010, Japan's support to Mongolia was just confined to, providing grants and financial aid, thus not reaping more tangible results. However, increasing Chinese influence in the region, Northeast Asia in particular and Indo-Pacific in general, forced Japan to seek, a new level of partnership with Mongolia in economic and security fields, thus opening the door for Mongolia and Japan to upgrade their bilateral relationship. Which is also in line with Japan's, Indo-Pacific strategy, that is free and open Indo-Pacific. The second third neighbor that entered into a strategic partnership is India, which was signed in 2015 during Modi visit, as I said, as India's own approach toward the Indo-Pacific, I would say, is shaped by new strategic and security environment coinciding with China's, rising ambitions, especially in the Indian Ocean region and South Asia. New Delhi has adopted its own Indo-Pacific strategy for a free, open, and inclusive region. Mongolia fits exactly in India's vision of Indo-Pacific strategy. So that is also, I would say, the bonhomie between the two countries. The latest among the third neighbors is US, with which Mongolia has signed a strategic partnership. It was done in late 2019 when the then President of Mongolia, Batulga, visited Mongolia and signed a strategic partnership. See, following the defense paper, US Department of Defense paper, which described Indo-Pacific, which released a report on Indo-Pacific, and the report mentioned, clearly mentioned in the report, which was released on June 1st, 2019, it clearly mentioned that Mongolia is one of the democracies in Indo-Pacific that are reliable, capable, and natural partners of the United States. So that was one of the reasons why the two countries signed the strategic partnership. Now, different cooperative initiatives or mechanisms in the form of democratic trilateralism or trilateral relationship are being talked about, in this part of the world, I mean in Mongolia, with regards to third neighbors, such as US, Japan, Mongolia trilateral, which is connected to Indo-Pacific strategy. But I would say in no way it can be described as an alternative to Mongolia, Russia, China economic corridor, which is the part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. So, to contain Chinese, domination in that part of the world, we need something like Quad or quadrilateral relationship. So Mongolia should basically, explore how it can include India to make a Quad. These are the versions of Western authors or American authors. They are saying this trilateralism will be successful. US, Mongolia, and Japan trilateralism. But I am saying no. Why India should be left behind? Because there are only three countries that are known as third neighbors with which Mongolia has a strategic partnership. And India is the second one which has a strategic partnership was signed. So why India should be left behind? And India, for that matter, India has been doing a lot of things in Mongolia, investing money for infrastructure development and all. So there should be Quad, not the trilateralism will work there. If all together three countries, along with Mongolia work together, they can to some extent contain Chinese, activism in Mongolia. So that's my point of view. Nevertheless, I would prefer to say that Mongolia should explore, as I said, a quadrilateral relationship so that, Mongolia could contribute itself to regional peace also within the Indo-Pacific, security framework. Now looking at India's G20 initiatives or priorities, rather I would say G20 priorities. The first agenda which I have identified basically, the first agenda relates to financing tomorrow's cities and establishing them as the foremost engines of economic growth. That's the first agenda I have identified. I would say it is estimated that by 2050, nearly twice as many people will live in cities. To sustain their economic potential, cities need to become more livable, through I would say upgraded infrastructure and services, such as reliable water, transport, power, waste management, and also affordable housing. Mongolia too needs this for their country's development. So it exactly fits what G20 India G20 priorities is there. The second agenda where India can lead the way is in energy transition. Today India is the world's third largest producer of renewable energy. Professor Sanjay Bhardwaj is sitting here. His book just last year, I think, was published on energy. That was a very good book which mentions everything, about India's needs. India's hungry for energy, everything. Unfortunately, I also contributed one of the papers in his book. The more he can explain about the book, I'm tackling different agenda right now. So today India is the world's third largest producer of renewable energy, with further expansion underway. India's success in scaling up solar energy will be beneficial for Mongolia as well, I would say. Mongolia has barren land, as I said. It's geographically too big in comparison to population, only 3 million population, and most of the population, you will not believe, more than 70% of the population is concentrated only in the Ulaanbaatar city, that is the capital city. So only 30% of the population are staying in the countryside. So they have barren lands. So this is beneficial for Mongolia as well, so far as renewable energy is concerned, solar energy is concerned. And for that matter, I will also say wind energy. So if you have barren land, you have potential for having wind energy. So wind energy is another area which can be produced in Mongolia in abundance, and hence renewable energy is the demand of the day in Mongolia. The third agenda relates to health, or health care for that matter. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the compelling need for a united global approach to fortify health systems to effectively, address emerging health crises. India's G20 presidency is a medium of change towards more resilient, responsive, and sustainable health systems, and to advance previously established G20 pandemic preparedness efforts. So Mongolia is being helped by India through telemedicines, and there are more opportunities it has in future where the outcome of India G20 agenda could benefit Mongolia. As part of its G20 presidency, India also hosted a special virtual summit that was known as the Voice of Global Summit under the theme Unity of Voice, Unity of Purpose. It was held on January 12-13, 2023. It was a new and unique initiative that envisaged bringing together countries of the global south and sharing their perspectives and priorities on a common platform, across a whole range of areas. Mongolia too participated in the Voice of Global South Summit. Now I would again, I would like to say again, that one of the major challenges before Mongolia is ecological degradation. Mongolia has severe winter and severe cold. And in the summer it's severe hot also, I would say, due to climate change. Earlier it was not there. So ecological degradation is taking place there. It has a livestock population in abundance, which during the severe winter, what I would say, the cold wave, the severe cold wave that is also known as Jud, it negatively impact, livestock population. Scores or thousands of livestock are died every year. So this is due to ecological degradation. One of my students is working on that for their PhD. I would also like to see his PhD, what he could suggest, to come out of all these kind of things. The G20 environment and climate ministers have already acknowledged the urgent need to strengthen policies and mobilize financing from all sources in a predictable, adequate, and timely manner to address climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation, including significantly increasing support for developing countries and work together on scientific knowledge sharing, in addition to raising awareness and capacity building as well. So already in December 2021, in Mongolia's case, I would say Mongolia proposed the new recovery policy under Vision 2050 to the parliament, and it has already been passed. This new recovery policy aims to solve 6 key economic constraints. Number 1, trade ports. Number 2, energy. Number 3, industrialization. Number 4, urban and rural development. Number 5, green development. And number 6, efficient governance. So these are the 6 key, ingredients so far as economic constraints are concerned. As this year's G20 discussions and outcomes have focused on the issues of trade, energy, and development among other issues, with the developing countries' need in the background, we can reimagine Mongolia implementing the G20 outcomes in a positive manner so as to see the development of its country. Yet, one must not ignore the fact that in the fast changing global and regional political and security environment, Mongolia's political stability, Mongolia's political stability, economic developments, feasible security surroundings, and forward-looking foreign policy strategies, are crucial for not only keeping its democratic, credential intact, but also keeping pace with new developments in the Indo-Pacific. So on the economic front, very important point I'm raising here, Indian companies have a lot to do in Mongolia, by exploring opportunities in Mongolia's mining sector through joint ventures and investment. The mining boom Mongolia is experiencing will be decisive for Mongolia's economic growth in future. And all this has happened in the post-1990 period. Earlier, Mongolia had, mineral resources in abundance, but it was unknown. Nobody was knowing that Mongolia has so much, mineral resources. But certainly after democratic revolution, new government took over power, and then they started, searching for mineral resources, and wherever they dig, they found. So this kind of things happened in Mongolia. So here I would say Mongolia's economic growth further depends on the exploration of 170 billion tons of coal, 205 million tons of petroleum, and 68,000 tons of uranium reserves, where India is very much required. Who knows, but future relations between India and Mongolia could well be underpinned by economic cooperation led by the mining industry. And the beginning has already been made by constructing the first oil refinery in Mongolia. I thank you all for listening patiently.
Thank you, Professor Sharad Soni. It was truly fascinating, the story of that faraway land. You brought it so closer to Indian interest, and for shedding so much light on this lesser known region. What more India can do for a country which is geographically challenged and politically sandwiched than to make it more resilient in economic dependence? In this context, you have flagged a few areas where cooperation could be furthered. My question to you is that enhancing, advancing digital infrastructure is one of the priorities of G20 presidency. And developing a service sector for a geographically challenged country would be the right step forward. How far Mongolia is positioned to take this initiative in India?
I would rather say in other way, India has been doing a lot so far as digitalization is concerned in Mongolia. To begin with, I would say I mentioned about Kanjur and Tanjur. 108 volumes of Kanjur and 226 volumes of Tanjur that have already been digitalized by India. Long back, not new, long back, I would say about 10 years back. And the copies have already been brought to India as well. And now, digitalization in health sector is being taking place in Mongolia. And similarly in IT sector, India has been very active in Mongolia, and this is one area which is left, I would say, IT sector. Although there is one Polytechnic Institute which is already been established there with the Indian help, that is known as Rajiv Gandhi Polytechnic, and also one named after Atal Bihari Vajpayee IT institution, and where digitalization work has been going on. And I think in the coming years, it will be India will more aggressively help Mongolia in the digital, even digital marketing things also, I would say.
Thank you. We can now take some questions from the floor.
You can say I'm a listener. I'm learning from you the way both the country are coming closer, and India is trying to make more and more presence in Mongolia and helping Mongolia in technology sector or mining sector or others. But my question is, sir, uh, between the two countries, like Japan is there, China is there, and do you feel there is any, problem or hurdle created by China if India is making entry into this region in a big way? So, number one. Number two, in fact, another important issue that is that emerged out of your presentation, and in my opinion also, Buddhism is most important factor bringing both the country more and more closer as far as cultural relations are concerned. Thank you, sir.
So how can it be important for for USA? It is understood that Mongolia is a democracy, and so USA treats democracy as its natural partners. But how for India? How for India? How for India's Indo-Pacific strategy?
What did you
Mongolia,
say? For US, its natural partner.
sir. USA considers democracy as its natural partners. So for USA, we can relate that Mongolia borders China, and also Russia.
So why not you are applying this to India? India is the largest democracy.
India is the largest democracy, but India's foreign policy has not considered democracy as a central tenet for making foreign relations, or it hasn't aggressively like promoted democracy in other countries, like USA has done. So how does Mongolia fit into free and open Indo-Pacific strategy of India? Thank you.
Mongolia, I know from Professor Sarad Soni. So, but I was just wondering one very that I would like to know your opinion, since you come from Inner Asian studies and you have written a lot of paper on Inner Asia. India had been trying to access to the Central Asian republics, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, all that. Of course, economic region, energy factors, and the geostrategic calculations are there. Trying to explore it through Iran, sometimes through Afghanistan, all that. If you are going in the history, if I remember, I was just watching a documentary, and I do find that Babur's mother was a Mongol, if I'm correct. So, and then you go with the Huns and all earlier Indo-Aryans, we had a very deep cultural, or you can say ethnic linkages with this community, Mongol, Central Asia, and then India. So how do you find that Mongolia can become an instrumental, can help India's access, strategic and economic, into the Central Asian Republic? This is one thing. And second, there is one organization that SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. If Mongolia comes into SCO, how it would impact on India's presence in SCO itself?
So, beginning with your question, if China creating any hurdles for Indian outreach to Mongolia, yes, time and again it creates, as we have been reading in the newspaper several times. Recent things happened, I would say when Dalai Lama visited Mongolia in 2016, and that time, Mongolian ambassador, it is not off the record, it is on record. Mongolian ambassador, he wanted actually India to interfere because China has, sealed the border, China-Mongolia border. And that time, also there was some interview I also given to the media. So they were also asking me same question, and my answer was that it is a bilateral issue. Why should India interfere? It is between China and Mongolia. There is no need India to interfere in that. So this is, I'm just citing as one of the examples that it was some kind of provocation. You can, describe it. Maybe India would react, but India did not react. So in terms of creating hurdles, I would say no. It's nothing serious kind of hurdles has been created so far as India-Mongolia relations are concerned. And China is also not like earlier it used to be. Now China has accepted that Mongolia is an independent country. Of course, China needs energy, and Mongolia has energy in abundance, especially coal. So China imports coal from Mongolia, so it is required. So, and another thing, Belt and Road Initiative is very important for China, so far as we all know as of today. Mongolia, China, Mongolia, Russia economic corridor is very important, which is not being successful as of now, due to problem in Russia and also problem in China as well. Economic downgrade and all, everything is happening. But this is required. This corridor is required for the development of Mongolia, I would say. So here China could play a positive role in Mongolia. But if you compare with China, not serious kind of hurdles has been created so far as India-Mongolia relations is concerned. But of course, if China is creating, as I said during my lecture, their neighbors in South Asia, why not India should create its neighbor in East Asia? So it's the basically exploration of new neighbors. Of course, in international relations, a lot of many things happens, and we should all, should be updated with this. Number two question was necklace of diamond strategy. I don't think something like this. Can you elaborate it in what terms you have used this word? Okay, if you take it in positive term, you see, I have already explained that India has been establishing first oil refinery in Mongolia. So that is infrastructure development. This is just the beginning. There are a lot more India has to do there, and Mongolia is also expecting. Recently, former president of Mongolia visited, India. He also visited our university. In SIS, we organized his lecture also. He also mentioned, actually, Mongolia is going to reformulate its constitution. So he's the chairman of the drafting committee of constitution. So he came India to consult, judicial experts and foreign minister also. He met foreign minister also. So it's not only for drafting of constitution related things, he talked about, but also exploration of relations, because 2025 it is going to over this oil refinery. Of course, India would also be benefited. As I said, Ingenious India Limited is constructing this oil refinery. So a lot of Indian technocrats are there. So slowly, yeah, one important mining sector, I would say uranium. We have already uranium agreement with Mongolia, which was signed back in 2009. So this sector is left behind. I think next term is to explore uranium there. So that will happen. Number three, you asked about democracy, and I replied immediately, India is the largest democracy, but you did not accept my answer. So go for the culture relationship. India-Mongolia relations, in terms of culture, is so deep rooted that nothing can deter the relationship between the two countries. So that way I would answer, And now Professor Sanjay Vadwa's question, how Mongolia could help develop relations with Central Asia. You see, there are 2-3 things I would like to highlight here. First, in Central Asia, there are 2 regions which have, nomadic background, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. And in the pre-Mongol period, Kazakhs and, Kyrgyz, they were there in the inner Asian region where Mongolia is existing now. So they had bonhomie among all the 3, Mongols, Kazakhs and Kyrgyz. And they still have very close relations, first. Second, I would say, Kazakhstan is the border country of Mongolia. Western part of Mongolia is bordering. It is not the direct border. Direct border is China and Mongolia. But there is a strip of 45 kilometers, which touches Mongolia and Russia. Just a road, only 45 kilometers. Then from Mongolia, Western Mongolia, you will reach Kazakhstan. And that is why, the single largest minority population is in Mongolia is Kazakhs. This is the single largest minority because the whole western part of Mongolia, Bayan-Ulgi region to Khobd region, they are all dominated by Kazakhs. More than 90% Kazakhs are staying there. I myself visited, their estate for almost 1 month in connection with a project, Kazakh minority in Mongolia. That was my project, and I saw it. And you will not believe one important thing I would like to highlight here. They are the Buddhist population, Mongols. Majority of the population are Buddhist, and they are the Muslim Kazakhs. But we have not heard any kind of ethnic or religious strife between the 2 communities. That's the beauty of Mongolia. And this can help India to develop relations with, especially with Kazakhstan. In so many talks, Mongolia and Kazakhs are together, Kazakhstan are together. Kazakhstan is also rich in uranium. Mongolia has already signed agreement with Kazakhstan to explore uranium. And I think if there could be trilateralism, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, India, that could be beneficial in my point of view. The next question was on SCO. If whether Mongolia could join SCO or not, something like that, Sanjay. I would start with saying, when only there were 6 members of SCO, and since then Mongolia has been observer in SCO. So Mongolia was the first observer country of SCO, and it has been continued. About 7-8 years back, there was a lot of talks about Mongolia to be incorporated as a member of SCO. When there was no talk about India and Pakistan to become member, even then there were talks. But Mongolia is also a little bit smart. They neither want to spoil relations with Russia or with China. There are 2 blocks clearly in SCO before India and Pakistan joining. Till joining, I would say there were blocks. China did not want India to become member. Russia wanted, so India became member. But China wanted Pakistan. If India is becoming member, then Pakistan will become member. And that's how India and Pakistan both were given membership. But in any case, if Mongolia becomes member, which India would like Mongolia to become member, if it becomes member, it is going to benefit only India. Because if you see the numbers in India's support, they are more. So that could benefit not only for bilateral relationship or multilateral relationship, but the major is security concerns. In security field, it would help.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll all agree it has been a fascinating session. You exposed us to the wonders of Mongolia. Please join me in thanking Professor Sharad Soni.
Thank you.